Hunter, what's up, man?
What's up? I thought.
Go. Whoops. Anyways,
we got our first casualty.
Off to a good start.
Yeah, that's the danger of the bro hug. You know, sometimes the equipment gets.
Was slightly over enthusiastic there.
Yeah.
All right.
This is great.
This is a beautiful part of SF. I've actually never been here.
It's like suburban SF.
Okay.
When we moved here, I was driving down to YouTube every day. Actually, I think I was still driving down to Mountain View, all the way to Google.
Let's go to YouTube.
Let's go to YouTube. And I needed something that was like on the southern part of the city. Okay, just keep going straight. I'm gonna take you to YouTube.
Let's throw.
There you
something
go. Yeah.
Do you mind throwing in
there
the
we go.
address?
Yeah, you know, if that way we can talk about more interesting things than me saying right turn, left turn. Oh, you missed it.
Yes. The driving skill should improve as I record more of these.
Exactly. There we go. Look, perfect. See, so that my commute. So it says what it says. 16 minutes, right? So my commute. I was driving back and forth to Mountain View every day in the early days of Google. It's like an hour from the city, and then so besides obviously really enjoying working on YouTube, to go from an hour commute, each way to 15 minutes each way, quality of life.
That is definitely a major quality of life.
Quality of life went up. I'm originally from New York, so I'm used to being like,
Queens, right?
Yeah, I would say 718 born, 516 raised.
Love that.
But came out here in the late 90s for grad school and just sort of stayed.
Well, maybe let's rewind a little bit before that. So you actually started in the entertainment industry. I
had a brief tour of duty in front of the cameras as opposed to behind. Yeah, I guess so. The YouTube, of the early days, I guess, was network television, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I worked on Conan O'Brien during its second season, which was a blast. Not quite the, behemoth that later became to be. It was always on the sort of about to be canceled, I guess. Maybe that you can say that was like my first startup, right?
Wow. Cancellation was a thing since...
Yeah, the old. Wait, we have to tell everybody this is the old version of canceled, right? Not the new version of canceled.
Got
so
it.
Not like canceled for like coming out in blackface or something like that. Canceled for ratings.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
yeah, no.
Different type.
Totally type canceled. This was because it was on at 1:30 in the morning, and so people weren't expecting a lot of it, but it's a network television. You gotta perform.
What would you say is the biggest thing you learned from working on network television?
Okay, two things.
First,
okay, this is good stuff because this is like the Medium post of like what working on a late night talk show taught me about startups. But two things. First, all about the team, right? So it's this really interesting band of folks who, some of whom had like a little bit of experience, but a lot of people who just had like high ceiling and a lot of passion. So for example, there was a writer who was a practicing surgeon. But he had worked with Conan on the National Lampoon back at Harvard and wanted to pivot back into comedy writing, right? There's also like Louis C.K. was a writer, the comic was a writer on the first season, all this type of stuff. And so you had this team together that just gelled. And it's sort of, I always say you can tell by the first 20 people at a startup, like whether you have the precursors for success or not. Obviously a lot has to go from there. But so the first thing when I got in there, and this was, that team was already put together, I was just like, oh, this is a really interesting group of people, right? Who sort of came together to do something new. Like that was interesting. Second was, sometimes when you're coming at, you're coming at the incumbents, right? People are used to like Tonight Show, this or that. Like, what are you going to do differently? You got to know who your like ICP is, right? Like who's your initial customer. So what happened was they were on at 1:30 in the morning. It was just kind of trudging along. And then their music booker, this guy Jim Pitts, started booking all these like bands and performers who had real niche audiences. So not trying to go for like, okay, what's the most popular we can get, but like people who have hardcore fan bases. And you have to remember, this is like mid-90s, so you couldn't just call them up on YouTube or things like that.
They were
like,
going for the verticalized
right.
SaaS
If you were seeing your band, if you're seeing like I don't know, we had the Allman Brothers, the Pixies, like if you're seeing different things who like were going to be on network TV, like you would set the VCR, you might even stay up because it was just cool. It was like a cultural event. And so, each band used to bring like a few more fans, and then some of those people would stay. And so it was like an interesting sort of strategy of, well, if we can't get, the tier A guests, the tier A bands, like what do? You look for people who are like strong communities, strong, your 1,000 true fans, and if you can like line up enough of those, like maybe a few of those 1,000 true fans become your fans.
Yeah, I love that approach, and I think we see this pattern in a lot of different things, including venture funds, for example, where sometimes it makes a lot more sense to have a bunch of small venture funds with, a dozen true fans or true companies that they're really excited about.
Well, I mean, that's I'd say one of the biggest problems in venture is like most venture capital firms don't know why they exist, right? Like if you take big firms and you get all the different partners in a room and you ask them why they exist, I bet you'd get one, radically different answers, and two, the majority of them being like very generic. You couldn't look at an answer and match it to a firm.
There's two good answers.
It's like we
management
exist.
fees and carry.
No. I'm not that cynical. I think these are all things that can be fixed. We exist.
Actually, on that,
to
this
build
is something
the next founders.
I will credit you for this. So, for Screendoor, a fund of funds, you are not charging fees, which is
well, for the first vehicle, we're not charging fees. Subsequent ones,
that's better.
We have a team now. We were doing it nights and weekends, and so we didn't want to essentially get paid for running it. We wanted to have skin in the game. We're all investors in it, and we wanted to show that, like, hey, this wasn't just a bunch of VCs raising more capital to make money off that capital. That like our incentives were all 100% aligned. Now we're fortunate enough that the reception to that and the initial traction was warmly received, I'd say, by both like our customers, the managers who are backing, and the LP community, that were like, oh, if this is going to really work, it needs a refounding, right? It needs its founding team. And so we hired this amazing woman in 2023, Lisa Colley. She hired 2 partners last year. And so now there's a team of 3, and like, their skin is all in the game, but they got to draw a little bit of salary. So what I'd say is it's an excellent product at a fair price.
That's the way to do it.
See, I can pitch it. I can solicit, because I'm not, no regulatory issues for me.
Oh, I forgot about that. Not that as long as you don't read the handbook, then it's fine.
Yeah, look, some people don't know me, right? You know me, some people don't know me. So what I say is like, look, Satya and I do 2 things. We back founders who start companies via Homebrew, and we back founders who start venture firms via Screendoor. And both of them bring us a lot of joy and have their own journeys. Homebrew is not meant to live beyond us. Like, we're going to do it for the rest of our lives, so it's not going anywhere. I have the logo tattooed on my shoulder, so there won't be any rebranding either. But Screendoor is definitely meant to outlast us, which means you have to bring a different approach to team building, to building the structure. Like, we have to remove ourselves as a dependency, even though we're fully committed to it.
The second order effects of doing something like Screendoor must be pretty large. I mean,
it's really fun. Like, so one thing that we're really committed to is that we're not backing minor leagues, right? We're backing what I say, like diamonds and diamonds in the rough. Some folks, some managers who like everybody knows, who are raising funds for their first time because they're spinning out of a larger firm, or they're a notable founder, and diamonds in the rough, people we think are amazing but may not be sort of bold-faced names yet, have the track record. But since we're like sort of on the field with those people, we know, and we believe we know, who is going to be a great investor, who founders really value, so on and so forth. So we're trying to, I always sort of run in my head, like before we, obviously the team underwrites it, but if people are asking me for my feedback, I'm like, could this manager beat me? If we were going head to head on a deal, not that it's a zero-sum game, but just as like, a gut check, could they beat me? Or could they find a deal that I could find? And if the answer is no, like they couldn't beat me and they're not going to find anything that I wouldn't find, we don't back them. Because like, we're not looking for the minor leagues. We're not looking for deal flow for, Homebrew, right? We're building a great collection of the next generation of managers who are going to like beat the mediocrity out of the industry by like scaring or eating the incumbents who aren't doing a good job, right? And so it's awesome. And I think it actually is like energizing over time to be around those people, versus if you can imagine we were just like, oh yeah, we got a bunch of managers, we sort of look through their quarterly updates.
Yeah.
We're doing it for deal flow.
Correct.
Like, these are not scouts.
Yeah.
In fact, like their information like doesn't go to Homebrew, doesn't go to Charles Hudson from Precursor works on this, doesn't go to those folks. Like, it sits with Screendoor. So we want to make it very clear that like any collaboration at a VC to VC level is going to be mutual opt-in, right?
Yeah.
You're not taking money with strings attached, and I think that's important because, frankly, I mean, we all see it. Like, a lot of the existing VC funds who underwrite new managers or GPs who are investing, they're like, hey, you invest before me and then you send me your best deals, right? And like, that's the quid pro quo.
I do think, Screendoor in that regard feels very different than the many dime a dozen fund of funds out there where I've seen two major approaches to fund of funds. One being we're just buying some deal flow, and it comes with that sort of expectation
access. You know, we have X million of this, and it's a black box. We're never going to introduce you to the managers because we don't want you to buy around us, like all that sort of stuff.
And then there's the other bucket, which, you know, and nothing necessarily wrong with it, but they're purely financial buyers where the purpose is just to deploy capital, and then
we say we are an LP of GPs, right? Like, you have 3 of the best early stage underwriters working full time on the team itself who can help you with all sort of like managing what it's like to deal with LPs, what, you know, what's normal, what's not normal. We try to set very clean terms also. We don't ask for part of the management company. We're not asking for all this stuff that, like, trying to, you know, be a preferred investor. We're trying to make sure everybody treats emerging managers well. And then on, like you're saying, on the other side, it's like, you know, can we actually be value add? Not like these people we back don't need our help sourcing deals. They don't need our help on, you know, like making investment decisions. We're not trying to coach people up. But, you know, building a firm, it's helpful to be able to turn to your peers or folks who might be a click or two ahead of them and be like, okay, this just happened to me. Is that normal? What did you do? You know, because it's just like founders talking to founders, like
and I think with
all the stories.
You and Satya's case, it wasn't that you had spun out of a large franchise firm. You built Homebrew from scratch.
Quite the opposite, right? Like, Satya had gone through some institutional venture before. He wasn't new to it, but I was new to it, and I had no interest, you know, especially during, like, I guess, like, my peak YouTube days. That coincided with the era where a bunch of the larger VC firms started to get there, like, oh shit, we need operators here, not just like bankers and financiers and lawyers, but like founders want to work with other builders. And so, of course, like, you know, many of my peers and colleagues, I got sort of the knocks on the door of like, hey, you know, we're looking for folks from Google, from Facebook, from, you know, Yahoo at the time, whatever. And I always found it, like, intellectually interesting, but I never wanted to do it because for 2 reasons. One, I didn't want to be like the 7th partner sitting around a table being like, you cover social, you know, or whatever. Like, I wanted to be driven by my curiosity, not by sort of like a coverage mandate. And 2, I don't do really well in like political situations where I don't think like great decisions are being made for purposes of process and, you know, sort of hierarchy and things like that. And like that described like late stage Google for me, and it also seemed to describe a bunch of venture firms. So I'm like, I can't imagine ever doing that. But I'd always wanted to work with Satya again, and so we chose venture as kind of like the business model to underwrite the work, being always willing to sort of like interrogate that if that's the right decision or not. And we've changed, you know, our business model over the years. But like, you know, I embrace the term. If like you ask you're like, what are you? I'm like, I guess I'm a VC. I'm not like trying to like hide from that.
I do think your career has been super polymathic though, and while there's many careers in Silicon Valley that I'm
Is this where we pause where people can Google polymathic?
Oh.
As opposed to polyglot, which is you speak a lot of languages.
Yes. A Renaissance man, if you will.
Does lots of things.
But I think that the difference between a polymath and a generalist is they tend to actually be really good at a ton of things that are kind of completely disparate, but also strangely connected.
Oh, interesting.
In your case, it's like you have like the writing and the comedy comes through in your blog posts, which ends up somehow benefiting your venture firm. And
I'm like, whether it's a
cool.
company, the venture ecosystem, whatever, like, you don't want 100 walks, but like one is okay, you know? So I decided once I got out of my own way in terms of, you know, who I am and what I want to do, you know, in my early 20s and figuring that out, I'm like, okay, I might as well be myself. Like, because if I'm not going to be myself, I'm going to be somebody else's version of what they want or fit into a box. And like, you know, I'm no longer unique. And so like, I might as well be unique for better or for worse. And I mean that in the sense of like...
Did you ever feel pressure to not be yourself?
Oh, all the time. Like like I went into we were talking about Conan before. Like I didn't stay on Conan and I went into management consulting after undergrad because I definitely sort of had this notion of like, oh, you got to get on an understood path, I didn't have my parents supporting me, so I'm like, I need to make a little bit more money, all that type of stuff. And what I realized was that I was also scared of embracing kind of roles, jobs that felt very personal, not just professional, because then I could always give myself the excuse if I failed, like, well, you know, you weren't really into it, you know, you're an A- management consultant, but if you went and wrote screenplays, you'd be like, it was a little bit of a defense mechanism to deal with the idea of failure, imposter syndrome or something. And then I was fortunate enough to only do management consulting for a few years, like find some interesting roles in the firm I was in and then go to grad school. And like that grad school pause was what gave me the chance to sort of be like, you gotta really embrace like not separating the personal and professional, being who you want to be, like not compromising your decisions, sort of a framework that helped me say like, okay, great, you know, you might, like, you only have one life, you might as well do it. And that's not from a planning perspective. You sort of mentioned polymathic before. Like, I'm not into the whole like, well, I'm going to do this for 3 years and then I'm going to do this for like, but I do believe in phases. Like, you make decisions, you make high quality of decision, hopefully with high quality of outcome.
There it is.
Yeah, we started, you know, here, we started there, then we moved across the street. So we're for narration, since people can't see, we're at YouTube in San Bruno, which is now multiple buildings, but was where I spent a lot of time with them. And
Something is cool about like knowing that this is gonna go up on YouTube, and that's
just getting
YouTube.
I mean, it was like such a big, you know. So I got to give a lot of credit to like Chad and Steve, the founders, and Eric Schmidt. Like at the beginning, they were all like, "Hey, look, you're gonna run as independent as possible," you know, and they delivered it, including like, you know, us opening our own campus and not getting sucked into, you know, 100% into Mountain View and stuff like that. So it was great. So I definitely, I think I was fortunate enough to have some experiences. It helped me realize that I was not going to be happy or maybe even like sustainable to not embrace who I was. And you know, every part of that, you know, has had its ups and downs, but I feel like it's made me very comfortable and happy with like owning the decisions I've made, and I can look at everything I did, and like no matter whether the outcome was, you know, fantastic, good, or, you know, not exactly what I wanted, like the quality of the decision was correct. I feel like people mess themselves up, especially like career-wise or whatever, when they start trying to work backwards from, well, what's going to make me successful? And then, you know, you can do that as a thought exercise, like what decisions lead to success versus not. Like, it's fine to analyze, but like just assuming that you can work backwards from success and not have any decision for the frameworks themselves, I think is tricky. And I also think when you're using other people's frameworks, either because, you know, like, oh, I want to make the same choice as Steve Jobs made, or Elon Musk, or whatever, or because you're, you know, doing what, you know, society, the norms of your community, whatever, are reinforcing, like, oh, I should start a company because all my friends are founders, or things like that. Like, that may or may not be the right decision for you. But I've been lucky enough that besides sort of having that centering, my mom has always helped me make career decisions, despite the fact that she knows nothing about business or technology. But she knows me, right? So I've always gut checked things about her. So like I almost didn't accept my offer at Google. I ended up going home over Thanksgiving. This was like, you know, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And I described the role. I thought it was too big, right? Because I was coming from this startup that was like 30 people, a company called Linden Lab that built Second Life. So I thought it was too big. And my mom's like, you just keep talking about how smart, like whatever this Google thing is, you just keep talking about how smart everyone you've met there is. Like, why don't you just go, and if you don't like it, you leave after a year, nobody will bet. And, you know, I was like, okay, you're probably right. Yeah, 10 years. And I left 10 years later, right? Yeah, so good old mom. And then when I was
you wouldn't have met Satya.
Right, I wouldn't have met Satya. And then even when I was doing Homebrew, we were pretty sure I was going to do it. But again, it was like November 2012. I go home, talk to my mom. I'm like, hey, look, I'm going to leave Google at the end of this year regardless. I'm kind of ready to go, but I was thinking about polymathing, you know, like you're saying, I was thinking about doing a bunch of stuff and seeing, or I'm thinking about doing this thing with my friend Satya, and I described that, and and she's like, well, you know, you think you like doing a bunch of stuff at once, but like the whole, you know, like you actually like having like at least one thing that's sort of your, you know, like your center of gravity, your harbor. So I'm not sure you'd really love this whole, you know, I'll write and I'll speak and I'll angel invest and I'll build stuff, you know. So like I think that that might be more, you know, fantasy than you know, reality for you. And she's like, and she didn't meet Satya, she didn't really know what venture capital was, but she's like, oh, the way you talk about him sounds like the way you talk about Philip, who's my best friend from childhood and still sort of like, you know, my closest friend in the world. She's like, so I've never heard you talk about anybody else like you talk about Philip, so I think you should go do that thing with Satya. She's like, thanks, Mom. So I came back, I'm like, Satya, I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then so we started Homebrew in, you know, beginning of 2013, did 10 years as kind of like very traditional early stage venture, co-led seed rounds, about 10 to 15 a year. But we never wanted to get too big. Like we never wanted to put too much money or team in between us and the founders. We just felt like that wasn't us. That wasn't what made us happy.
A lot of people say that when they start, then lose it.
Well, because the incentives of the ecosystem and, you know, the game on the field has gravitated towards bigger, right? And so that if you're at all good at what you do, that's like the easiest path to follow. And so it takes, I think, some trade-offs to have the opportunity to do that, but to decide not to. And that's what we did in 2022, as opposed to raising a fourth fund, we decided to essentially self-fund, which means
Homebrew for forever.
Homebrew forever. Homebrew forever. I'm the marketing guy. But we still make about 10 to 15.
You do
investments a
like
year.
naming things.
I do like naming
you have
things. I do
Second
like naming
Life.
things. Second Life, Screendoor. Sachi did Screendoor. I can tell you that story. But yeah, the other things are sort of all team efforts. But I had a hand in. So we just now we can have conversations like, let's say you were a founder and we were talking, we can have a conversation that doesn't have to end with like, this sounds great, we would love to work with you, so long as you have between 11.8 and 13.2% of your round to sell us, because that's what the spreadsheet says we need now that we have a $300 million fund. We can just sort of say, great, like, is a round coming together? We can be the first check-in, the last check-in, we can do the whole round, we can come in between rounds. Like, we're basically just fungible, and so we have like, I think, the alignment and flexibility of an angel with like the gravitas and experience of an institutional, and it's been really fun. There's obviously trade-offs, many of them economic, but like for us, it just gets back to like where I think the business model underwrites the work as opposed to what's the expression, the tail wags the dog. So we've been doing that. We've made about 40 some odd investments. So I have we have a bunch of obviously the first 3 funds to manage in those companies. We have about 45 investments now over the last 2 years with our own capital, and we have Screendoor, which I mentioned before. In fact, I know this isn't going to go online today, so I don't mean to date it, but you know what happened like 15 minutes before you picked me up?
I don't.
One of our earliest investments just filed their S1 publicly to go public. Chime.
Let's go.
So I haven't even looked at the S1 yet. You were like coming around. I'm like, oh shit, I don't have time to do this. But like,
dude, congrats! You guys did Plaid.
Well, yeah, we did a lot of early stuff in.
You've done a lot of cool stuff
Gusto,
in fintech.
Yeah, we like fintech. We basically we were fortunate and lucky. We came into the first fund with just a belief that like.
But also cruise, so not just fintech.
Cruise, yeah, no, like, but our in general, we thought that like software, what does Mark Andreessen say? Software eats the world. That our version of that, software enabling the world, would just mean that like lots of types of data that before was sort of siloed, difficult to access, unaugmented, or so on and so forth, would be like become available. Usable by not just the Fortune 500 and wealthiest consumers and so on and so forth. So we ended up doing a lot of stuff that we thought was focused on sort of like, let's call it this 25th to 75th percentile consumer business, so on and so forth. So like Gusto, right? Payroll benefits, all that stuff for SMBs, right? Chime, not the sort of, bank the unbanked, and not the, $2,000 gold card for, for the high net worth individuals, but like the 25th to 75th percentile who is just getting treated like shit by their banks or financial institutions. Plaid, why shouldn't people have access to their own credit card and banking data, and why can't that data be used to enable or improve experiences for them, right?
Absolutely.
And so, it was just running through a bunch of, beliefs that when we met the right founders, sort of there was, mutual clicking maybe ahead of consensus, right?
And it's cool that these products also have, in a way, enabled each other. If Plaid has been a huge part of why Chime has been possible.
Yeah, we didn't have sort of like a whole like Keiretsu strategy of like, oh, then we'll connect you all. But we did know that if we got to critical mass, like in a vertical quickly, that the founders would have reasons to talk. And I'm not saying like, Chime and Plaid talked, but like, I do remember one of our first kind of, we do our annual meetings with our investors and stuff each year. And one of the things we've always done after those is we've hosted a dinner, and we don't just invite our investors, a small group of, endowments, foundations, so forth. We always have invited founders that we've backed and any advisors, any advisors that we have working with those companies. And it's always been so great to watch, everybody mingle, including, some people who are like second or third time founders who've never met, who previously, I think it's a little more standard now, but had never met like a venture LP before. And because like, again, like you were saying, so much of this has been like opaque. I need to keep these separate. And we're just like, the communities are best when everybody is together and knows one another. And so at one of the early ones, maybe it was like 5-6 years in, to watch Chris Britt from Chime, the CEO and co-founder of Chime, talk to the founders of this company called Nello that is doing like BNPL plus sort of some fintech stuff for, again, like the major middle class of Mexico, and just watch Chris sort of like swap stories, from like the first 5-6 years. I'm not saying like, oh, and that helped, the Nello guys make this decision, but like that's the type of stuff that you just like, the VC doesn't need to get in the way of that, right? The VC should just like sometimes just make the introductions, have people been like step back and let the builders talk to the builders.
It seems like throughout your career there's been this thread of financial empowerment of the smaller, scrappier guys, whether it's your advocacy at YouTube for really making sure that creators get paid, or even the pretty famous news article about Snapchat and you pushing them. You're a Snapchat influencer, which is not very common for VCs.
I sort of feel like you're going to put me on the the therapist couch now. I have to lean this back and we have to dissect why. Okay, so I do think so.
What happened in Queens?
I know. I'm going to tell you. No, it really does come from my childhood. I think two things come from my childhood. The first is, my parents are wonderful parents. Love them. Great upbringing. I was very fortunate, but we were sort of like, I'd almost say like I grew up like downwardly mobile, like through I probably started out like upper middle class and then sort of ended up like firmly middle class, just through the way like my father's career worked out and different stuff like that. And so I wanted to make sure that I saw technology as an empowerment for like all parts of Maslow's hierarchy, right, including that bottom rung of like food, like hey, if you're gonna work at tech companies, you're gonna make software, you're gonna be on these platforms, let's make sure that there's financial stability before of or ahead of or in addition to just making the world's information freely available, or likes and retweets and influence and stuff. So I think my own thing was like, hey, financial independence is something that is important, and that you can't rely on like a company to provide you. You have to build your own stuff. And the second thing was, my dad did business, my mom was an artist and art teacher, so I think like I sat at the intersection of kind of like left brain, right brain,
there's the polymathic thing again.
Yeah, which is like, look, I like spreadsheets, but I also like creativity, and so maybe that gave me I think not I wasn't the only one who believed this in the ecosystem, but I think it made me pretty passionate about the idea that like if you're going to build this virtuous cycle of help people create together, that like the last part of that virtuous cycle is help them get paid if they want, because otherwise at the very least, like if you're not doing that, it's a strategic blind spot, if in the sense of like somebody who does get creators paid or does focus on financial stability could attack you from that dimension. And at the very worst, it's like exploitive, right? Like we're all getting rich while, the long tail of UGC, tries to make rent or, goes to their barista jobs. And that just never sat well with me. I think we're all like really well compensated in our industry. And, part of the longevity of tech and having the license from a consumer standpoint and trust, from a regulatory standpoint, from a, cultural standpoint, is the idea of abundance, grow the pie, but share it, right? And so sometimes the lack of sharing that occurs in different ways, or the ways that like value is captured very specifically by those of us who work in the industry, but maybe at the expense of those from outside the industry, or maybe with a callousness for those that are impacted outside the industry. Just like, I don't know. It's probably why I'm not a billionaire. I've never been like sociopathic enough.
Yeah, this like trade-off between value creation and value capture obviously does exist, but the difference between the two is one is kind of zero sum, one is not.
Look, like I that's why I say we invest in people who disrupt with love as opposed to contempt. I think if you disrupt with love when you're building a startup, that you're going to piss some people off. Like anyone who changes the status quo, there's at least somebody who either doesn't believe or benefits from the current status quo, who is going to be like, no way, let alone your competitors, so on and so forth. So you can't be afraid of conflict. You can't be afraid of like belief in the face of adversity. You can't be afraid to like roll up your sleeves and fight sometimes. But I think you have to fundamentally believe that you're doing something that's not just like creating value off a broken industry because that industry hasn't yet been transformed by software and you're going to extract it. Like you have to believe that like ultimately you're doing something for your customers where like, you're creating 10x the value and you're taking a small percentage of it. Like if you do that, I think, you build better durable companies, and people can vote with their feet. Like it's, I always say,
what was that feeling when you were building Second Life?
Second Life was, sort of this idea. So, it was like one of the first sort of like immersive virtual worlds. It was sort of, came before the Roblox, the Minecrafts, but never captured exactly that scale. And the idea was that like you should be able to go into a virtual space that's not flat, that's not email, MySpace profiles, whatever. You should be able to go into a virtual space that's not a game to play through, but a Legos on steroids. Sims where you control the entirety of the space. Like for a lot of people, it was sort of like virtual Burning Man, and I think that almost became part of the challenge, which was sort of like well, what do I do here, and how to but on the other side, if we had just built like a virtual Disney World, if we had just built something that was shiny, fun, and clean, I think it would have failed even harder. And what we ended up having was like this profitable business that had one of the first like actual peer-to-peer economies where you could exchange a virtual Linden dollar for a real dollar and so on and so forth. I should have been like a Bitcoin billionaire, based upon being so early into these virtual economies. Somehow I muffed that and had to keep working. But yeah, that was, so the belief was like, okay, this is a virtual place. You are attracted to it for purposes of, initially sort of self-expression, finding your tribe, a space to hang out. But, you can make stuff, and if you can make stuff, you can sell stuff. And it's like, it was all that type of thing. The assets weren't just like, oh, you earn coins and then buy an outfit from the game, right? Like somebody with Photoshop could make a dress, upload it, and sell it to somebody else, right? And we were sort of like the IMF. We just controlled like it was a floating exchange rate. But you could always exchange for money with us as a broker for like a 2% fee. So like if two people in Second Life if you were like, hey, I've got $100 Linden, I'll sell you, I'll sell you them for $5. Great, but then that's like an unsecure transaction. You both have to trust each other. But if like you listed those $100 Linden on the Lindex, the Linden exchange, you could the other person could securely buy that, and we would just like take 2%. We also sold land, all that type of stuff. We were basically,
that's super cool.
Yeah, these virtual environments have like, if you nail them, you can take every internet business model and every real life business model and run both of them. Like it's incredible, which is why like Roblox is a crazy valuable company and all that stuff. So it was always that. So like for me, it was Second Life and then AdSense and then YouTube, which were all that aspect of either one or all parts of that: creative tools, community, and economics. Like AdSense, obviously,
like parallel financial systems.
Yeah. AdSense, was sort of the attraction for me, and that's where I met Sacho. Was during the sort of peak, long tail of blogging and people being able to spin up websites and stuff. It was like,
that's a cool car.
Okay, you can just now you can if you can build large audiences or passionate audiences, you should be able to make money off advertising without ever have to like going and pitching a brand yourself, without having to put up like bad banner ads or spammy stuff. And so at the time it was just kind of like contextual text ads, and obviously it grew, but it appealed to me like because of that. I was like, oh, this is the economic engine for the long tail web.
You're pretty known for your writing.
Well, pretty known amongst a very small group.
You have a lot of rabid nerdy
no
fans.
Wikipedia page. People used to be like, I follow you on Twitter. I don't tweet anymore. So now I only have my blog. Fewer people read it, but it's okay.
Yeah, I read your blog when I was
Some
19, actually.
Some of it's pretty smart.
I started reading it when I was 19, when I first moved to San Francisco, and I was working on a gaming fintech company. And I just thought a lot of the stuff that you had done at the intersection of like entertainment, technology, finance, I was a big like Minecraft kid growing up, and
I enjoy writing. Like it's a thing of like we were talking about Conan before. It's like, I don't know, maybe I would have stayed with the writing side of stuff, but like basically
arguably you have.
Obviously I have, yeah, in some ways. Like I don't schedule time. I don't have a content strategy. I don't track like page views. I write when I feel like I have something that I want to write, and the two things that motivate me are either, damn, like I'm trying to figure this out, and I bet somebody out there has like information. I'm putting something out there so that somebody can help me learn, or I think I've learned something that if I share it, document it, will resonate with at least one other person, right? And even in those cases, it's not like, oh, I have the authoritative, this is the authoritative post on whatever. It's more of just like, hey, this is my learned experience. It may or may not, be relevant 100% of the time.
What's something cool or serendipitous that happened as a result of you writing something?
I love when my stuff crosses over. Like, so less when it's like, oh, and then this famous tech person read it, or so on and so forth. So I wrote something on when I have a 13-year-old daughter, and early on, like I forget exactly when the first generation of like Amazon Alexas came out and stuff, but the Echoes with Alexa. But we had one, and once she could start talking, she'd be like, Alexa, blah blah blah. And I wrote this thing about Alexa's turning my daughter into an asshole, because I was kind of peeved that it wasn't there was no affordance to say like, Alexa, please, right? Like that there wasn't even like a parent mode, you know, where you could turn it on, where it turned that like that into the prompt word, you know, like not that it should not that etiquette should be enforced on everybody. And obviously I know that it's different talking, you know, I understand the school of thought that says, you know, we're going to talk to machines different than talk, but I'm also a big believer in like muscle memory, behavior, defaults, right? And I wanted my kid just to default to, you know, please and thank you. And so I wrote this thing about how they should do it, so on and so forth. And two things happened. One, somebody from Amazon got in touch with me, and we had a powwow about, you know, talking about this and different stuff, and what if they did this, what if they did this. And the second thing was, it, you know, kind of quote unquote went viral, right? We're like, I don't remember what it was, but like Good Morning America was like, oh, do you want to come on and bring your daughter and whatever? I was like, no. So I've had a few pieces like that which have crossed over to mainstream, and they usually end up with kind of, you know, would you like to come appear on a morning show or this or that? And I've always turned them down for two reasons. One, like I never want to be, you know, like my words are on the page. Like I've always just treated my blog as like, this is what I believe. You're free to like, you know, quote from it, but there's like, other than reading you my blog post, I have nothing else to say. And two, I've joked that I never want to do anything that makes my first page of Google search results, or at least the above the fold part, things I don't control. Right? So I'm always
Did
like,
you ever come close to that?
Yeah, for so long now AI busts it up because, like, you know, I don't know if I'm significant enough to prompt a, you know, sort of AI response from Gemini or anything, but like, yeah, for a long time, for most of my adult existence, you know, like the first 5 above the fold things, if you search Hunter Walk, you know, especially if you put them in quotes, or like my blog, my LinkedIn, like, you know, my YouTube channel, like whatever, like stuff I control. I felt very good about that. You know, I was like, I'm not going to mess it up by becoming the, you know, my daughter's an asshole guy, or the, there should be Wi-Fi in movie theaters guy, which also took a circuitous route to like, you know, some celebrities and stuff like that. So I love it when it crosses over. I forget who coined the term. Maybe it was, what's her name? I don't remember her name, it'll come to me. But context, the idea of context collapse, right? When somebody encounters a piece of information or a piece of media, piece of context, authored by somebody without any other information about that person, because if you understand that person, then you're like, oh, I get it. I've read all Hunter stuff. This is like, Hunter's not an asshole. But like, when context collapse occurs, you're much more likely to get outraged over sort of like the small snippet of, so it's not fake news, right? It's not like, oh, they never said this or never did this. It's, you've lost all the, you're consuming it without the context of either the individual situation or entirety. And so, you know, it is not healthy to live, you know, to live in that state. And so I was like, I think
this is often hijacked by media for clicks. We obviously know this. Politics, media.
Politics, media is adversary, like all the time. Aggregators, you know, it's in like, I'm a big like NBA fan, and like one of the big debates now is, you know, sort of, you know, the move towards like players doing their own media and stuff, so they control their own voice, their own narrative, their own, you know, business model. And you ask them one of the reasons, you know, like why they've done that, and they're like, well, because the, you know, everybody's unfair to players now. You know, you do anything, you say anything, and 70 parts of the 70 sentences will be, you know, turned down into like one sentence, you know, that the aggregators use to get clicks. And like, yeah, it's kind of shitty that, you know, the incentive model of sort of where we've derived with that stuff, you know, sort of drives that behavior. And it's one reason why I've, you know, like changed my behavior and consumption of social media, especially sort of like places like Twitter, which, you know, at a personal expense and sadness for a lot of reasons, but I think it's healthier for me.
I definitely feel that my policy on this has been to try to like create more and consume less. I know that's a cliche thing to say, but I had this like one arrangement with a friend of mine who is actually an actor and has like a fair bit of you know, people in the media that feel some type of way about everything he does, whether for better or for worse. And we kind of came up with this idea of like, okay, we'll make stuff, but I'll log into your phone and you log into my phone and we post it for each other. And that was sort of the first way where I was able to like put out like a stupid piece
Right.
of music out there
Right.
that I was pretty proud of, even like trying to put something out there. And I think the creating part is fun. I think interacting with people who've created your things is also so fun.
Yeah.
And the sad part is when there's negative discourse online, it makes it hard to enjoy the part of like the multiplayer mode.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a shame.
I mean, I've always sort of been like, look, it's, it's, not like a, product feature that I think a lot of people would use, but, I always wish that Twitter, or at least, somebody built a extension where you could like toggle attribution on and off, right? So remove, like, be able to look at your, back in the day, like your Twitter newsfeed, without any indication of who sent it. So basically just hide the avatar and sender name. And again, like, I'm not saying, oh, so context collapse everything. It's like, no, because some, obviously things come from a particular thing. But like, I guess just, form an opinion, a little bit separate from like standing, well, everything that so-and-so says is magical, so this has got to be right. Like, I think, a lot of people who claim to want like sort of, intellectual free thinking, intellectual independence, intellectual honesty, like, do tend to cluster around the same points of view and same people, which, sort of seems a little bit ironic. And I'm not putting myself in that bucket of either like, this is no purity test. I think, purity tests are always set up for like the person you're talking to fail it and you to pass it. Like, nobody sets up purity tests that they fail, unless I guess they're sort of really depressed. But I always try to just say like, for the most part, lots of people are just trying to do their best, and their best day, don't judge them by their best day, their worst day. Everyone's got their own like internal shit going on, and like you don't have to spend time or energy, in the same way with everybody. Like, I enjoy narrowing sort of the group of people over time that I really put the emotion behind. But like, you don't have to fight every fight, and you don't have to have a strong, sort of binary opinion about everybody you encounter. That's one of the things I was like, somebody once showed me something that I said or wrote a while back. You forget these things sometimes, and they were like, oh yeah, you once said your investment thesis at Homebrew was backing founders we love in markets we don't hate. And before they showed that to me, if you had asked me like, sum up your investment thesis in one sentence, I probably would have said 5 sentences, and then none of them would have been as good as that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That like distills the effort of what does it mean to have, to work hard but have as much agency as possible over who you work with. It's like, well, first and foremost, it's are you excited to support these people, this vision of what they're building? And do you think if they built it successfully, you're going to be proud of not only the outcome, but like how they built it and who they are? And you don't get that right all the time.
It seems you've oriented a lot of your career decisions, you/your mom, around really optimizing for being around the best people. I wish that had been integrated in me earlier. I think being from Egypt, like, a lot of the conversations around like what career paths you should choose, or like what you should do versus just who you should do it with. Like, when you talk about working on, a comedy show, in Egypt, it would have been kind of laughable, no pun intended, to be working at a comedy show. But from your perspective, you're like, well, the people were great, they were really smart, it felt like a startup, so I did that. Same thing seemed to have happened with YouTube. Same thing seemed to have happened with, how you decided to co-found.
Yeah, I think
Homebrew.
I think it's just important
really like
to me,
that
especially as somebody who's like, I'm a sociable introvert, so I enjoy people, but I only get so many, like, there's only so many people that I can actually spend time with. That I sort of saw that, like, okay, I have a relatively reasonable, intuitive sense, like a relatively good judge of at least some of the attributes or characteristics that I'm most fond of. Like, maybe that's not in absolute terms, but and so if I find clusters of them, like, and it's working on something that I find sort of, interesting and personally passionate, not just like, academically interesting or intellectually interesting, but like, oh, I can impact this. This is part of who I am. I would be thrilled to have contributed to a project like this. That's sort of enough for me to say yes, right? And like I said, sort of, if you make a good decision, no matter where the outcome is on the sort of, outsized to subpar spectrum, I think especially as it applies to sort of a world of tech where it's like, okay, so you're going to make a bunch of these decisions over the course of a lifetime. If you keep making good decisions, you'll even sort of maybe get pulled up. Gravity will pull you into higher and higher quality potential outcomes. And because of power laws, that if you're really fortunate, once in a while one of those will be 100x, 1,000x what you could have imagined. And so why not do that, right? And when I try to give people career advice, I'm like, just so long as you know what you're optimizing for and you're not avoiding things that you want to do but are scared of, you'll probably be okay, over the course of time. And obviously that,
maybe I'll ask you for some career.
I'm always
career
happy to,
advice.
but I mean, this all presupposes some degree of world stability and birth lottery stability, right? That being in the
Seems some
being
of that
here
is
now,
under-
being able to
under
do that.
threat currently, which is
Unfortunate,
but
I sort of joke my daughter's going to start a few rungs up on the ladder, but now my wife and I care more about the stability of the ground the ladder's perched on than can we get her further up the ladder. And again, different people, I think people feeling safe is very important, and when people don't feel safe, they can make lots of weird decisions. So I don't fault the people for whom safety is multiple passports, or safety is bunkers, or safety is getting rid of, maybe I do fault the people for whom it's getting rid of immigrants or whatever, but for me it's okay, there's this balance of giving accommodations and advantages to my child in a world in which she doesn't need to be protected from everybody else because we've screwed everybody else, which is I don't know what you're seeing, but AI is hitting white collar, right? In interesting ways, and this whole sort of rebalancing of what are the expectations, what are the jobs, career paths, and sort of status positions for the elite, right? For college graduates, professionals, all these types of things. This is going to change a lot. I would say my political persuasion is I think lightly regulated capitalism with a strong social safety net is I don't know if that corresponds to a political party, but that's my true north. I'm let capitalism run fast and hot with just some guardrails, but know that it's going to cause negative externalities or dislocations while it is doing good things, not as its primary goal, and figure out as a society how to help support those people who have been dislocated in one way or another, or by the fast changing abundance economy. So I don't know, that's my hope.
I think it's, I feel similarly in that you want uncapped upside, but I do think we need to do more to cap people's downside.
It's just smart. It just, if it gives you, if that, and it's not about handouts and suckling on the teats of the state. It's about knowing that you can take risks, you can invest, you have some stability to invest in your own entrepreneurship, your own self-improvement. And that doesn't mean that the people who aren't pulled up by the bootstrappers, that we're trying to sort of normalize it, and there's no outsized outcome for really hard work. I'm also a believer that there is a certainly a correlation, and almost always over a long period of time, a causation between effort and outcomes. And so we sometimes say, or we went through this phase in Silicon Valley where it's oh, that's a good culture, that's a bad culture for a company, and I'm that's a really overly basic way of looking at it. Companies that have cultures that are legal, consistent in sort of how they operate, and transparent, might not be some of those might be not attractive to you, but that doesn't make it that makes it bad for you, not absolutely bad, right? Oh hey, another one of my quips is sort of anybody who tells you you have to sacrifice everything to do a startup is dangerous, but anyone who tells you you don't have to sacrifice anything is naive. And so I am glad. I think there's a lot of things that have swung too far past center, but I am glad that we're sort of back in a place where you can have different discussions about which point on the scale of hours per week do you want to work, which hybrid, remote, this or that, there are bad implementations of any of those, and you shouldn't work at companies that are doing bad implementations of those. Work hard but don't get paid. Work hard but don't get equity. Like, that sucks. I wouldn't go there. But people should self-select into the sort of environments and situations they want, and that's fine. Like, you build those sorts of companies and cultures when you have sort of consistency and cohesion, not when you're telling somebody one thing but then operating under a different principle. We're heading back now. We got to do. Is there like a lightning round?
Oh, no, we
What
can
sort
just
of
keep driving around. I'm really enjoying this.
What sort of questions? Are there questions you've asked other people that I haven't gotten asked yet?
Well, there's questions that stuff I'm just curious about
Okay,
that
keep
I
going.
would like to
It looks like we've got
ask you.
we've got like 6-7 minutes left.
Yeah,
so
we
let's do
can.
it.
I mean, I'd love to keep going if
No,
you have the
hard.
You've got a hard
The
stop?
name of this is called Hard Stop.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, well, pressure's on. Okay, so I want to do stuff in the entertainment industry, and I also want to do stuff in the technology industry. And I want to do both. Whoops. Maybe I'll
You're gonna have to re-ask that question.
stick to. You know what? A little bit of bloopers never hurt anybody. Is this
I was
still,
gonna be like, that's
is this
that's a
still
sign from
rolling?
God.
Is this rolling? You can check the Apple Watch.
Here,
to
I can
see.
hold it. Here we go.
Perfect. There we go. Now it's turned
This
into a
guy,
real vlog.
I don't know what's going on here.
Oh, it's still rolling, so we're good.
Nice.
Okay. Let's
do
fasten that back on.
Okay,
Oh, we have the light,
we have the light.
I guess. Oh, do you want to do it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't. It's here. We hold it. We'll hold it for.
You know what? It's gonna turn into a YouTube vlog.
Yeah. This part's going. This part's bonus footage. You have to be a premium subscriber.
Premium subscriber
this
will
is on-
definitely
this is on the
paywall this. If you are a venture firm, you need to apply to Screendoor. If you are a founder, you need to read every single thing that Hunter has ever written.
Just some of it. Just some of it.
And
Hunterwalk.com. Hunterwalk. Hunter@homebrew.co. You can find me most places.
hunterwalk.eth.
Yeah, when I was doing more social, people joked that I was. They called me first friend, and I was like, "What do you mean by that?" They're like, "Whatever social app I open and sign up for, I get matched with you. You're already there, so you were my first friend on all these things."
This
now
makes
I live in a
sense.
cave. Now I'm old and I live in a cave. I'm letting all of the vibe coders and.
What? Wait. Living in a cave is not an old person thing. That's a young person thing.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I live in a van by the river. Is that because we're past van life type of stuff? I don't know. Basically, what I say is I enjoy.
I literally have a blow-up mattress in the back of this car.
At one point, I was very worried about getting old and the question of what I mean about relevance. And now I sort of I find it amazing that there's these successive generations of people under me, all of whom are coming into the world with different assumptions about, how technology works and what it should do, and that the fact that I get to meet some of them, back some of them financially, and work on their behalf, is such a joy versus this kind of oh my goodness, I'm not known by everybody. I'm not, on the open on the board. I'm not whatever. Now we got audio. See now.
Well,
now it's a
now we have
podcast.
audio.
Now
For
it's just a
now
podcast.
it's just technical difficulties. For now, this will have to do bonus footage.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, keep writing. Your stuff's getting read by your 1,000 rabid fans, of
Exactly.
which I was one of them when I was 19 years old, and it really helped guide my thinking. I thought it was cool, and I also liked that it wasn't extremely long. I'm super ADHD, and I like the concision.
Because
the
I don't know
wordplay.
drafts. I write it 99% of the stuff I do is just sit down, write it, hit publish, correct the grammatical errors later, maybe. I find drafts get in the way of.
Maybe that's that entertainment industry.
Right, it's
training.
you got to make 5 shows a week.
Yeah.
No time. If you did a great show, doesn't matter. There's a new one to make. You did a shitty show, doesn't matter. There's another, one coming up the next day.
I like that. I like the fast-pacedness of that.
Well, that's what when they're we're just the 50th anniversary of SNL, right? And so they've done a lot of interviews with Lorne Michaels, so on and so forth. Who's a fascinating guy.
Your turn.
And I had to work out with the trainer this morning. I'm barely able to hold this up. But
This feels very YouTube early days.
Yes, right.
Holding the camera, driving
this
around.
is Lonely Girl 15. This is what was the first video? One of the founders, Jawed goes.
Remember
to the
to
zoo.
smash the like button and hit subscribe.
This is where we and then we have to put in some overlays to click and stuff when we're using the linking function and stuff. But so I do find you're talking a little bit about entertainment. I do find interesting parallels sort of in the creative entertainment world, just given, again, like a lot of people trying to do something, sort of the biggest challenge being, some version of product market fit, right? Do people care, what I'm building? Being able to be accelerated by, gatekeepers and institutions, but, rarely, increasingly not able to be blocked by them. And also that just sort of being, what do they call it? Like sugar, not protein, right? Like that stuff might throw you up with a little bit of promotion or, that type of stuff, but ultimately like the good stuff survives and the, or at least the popular stuff survives, I guess. And that's what I love. I mean, like I was so lucky, given my age, to sort of like be, online in the early days of the consumer internet and just kind of like find my tribe. And I've never forgotten what it felt like, as a sort of a, like late teenager or whatever, to, come upon, bulletin boards and news groups and just find people who are like passionate about the same type of stuff I was passionate about.
Dude, that was like my home when I had no friends.
Yeah.
The impact of these products, I know there's downsides to people perpetually existing online and we need to touch grass more, but when I was in Egypt and I had no friends, like being able to play on Minecraft servers and learn things from YouTube
100%.
videos, it was just such an important part of honestly, it's still such an important part of what I do now and how I do so much of my learning. So I'm glad that stuff like this exists.
Yeah.
And as long as we can find a way to like weave it more into reality where we still do stuff in the real world, I think it's good.
Yeah, look, responsibility comes when building the technology, and maybe it's true that either business models and or some of the metrics we chose to optimize for, prevent thinking in a more nuanced way about, the negative externalities or like when is too much YouTube. But like I am still such a, so bullish on what technology can and does do, and I look at the stuff that's going on with like AI in medicine and the chances over the, for everything from drug discovery to fewer medical errors to scaling, accessibility of diagnostics and other sorts of early and preventative, tests and measurements. Like that is just, that is amazing. And it's just like GDP isn't the only way to, measure the economy or the health of the economy. You can't just look at life expectancy or things like that and say, oh, everything's fine. It's, it's always an average, and you got to look at actual cohorts. But like I just think it's still a wonderful time to be working in this industry.
Absolutely. Super excited for it. And
Peace.
peace. Don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah. Hit that like and subscribe button.